You are listening to Inspired Caring with Michelle Magner, episode number 147. Hello, welcome to Inspired Caring. I'm your host, Michelle Magner. If you are caring for an older family member, this is the podcast for you. Each week, I bring insight, tips, inspiration, and strategies to help you care for the people that you love without losing yourself along the way. Having cared for both of my grandmothers, I've helped manage everything from hospital stays, households full of belongings, to navigating senior living and end-of-life care. And I've worked in senior living as a result of that experience, serving my residents and their families as they've been on this journey too. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope you enjoy this episode of Inspired Caring. I'm very excited to welcome Robin Weeks to the podcast. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Michelle. It's great to see you.
I'm just really excited about your business and your background and how you are supporting caregivers. So tell us about a little bit just about where your story started with caregiving, and then let's talk about my pivotal point.
Great, thanks. Well, I always love to tell my caregiving journey story. It's kind of a long one, so feel free to stop me anytime.
Let's do it.
It was primarily caring for my mother after my father died. In retrospect, you look back and you think, wow, that journey really started sooner than I really thought it had,
Mhm.
So my father had become terminally ill. They live a state away from me. And I had an older brother who lived close by, and he was helping a lot, but he was quite ill as well and was not really telling us the seriousness of his illness. So I started going once a month to see my dad. He ended up having to go into nursing care because of his illness, and trying to help out and relieve my brother a little bit, and visit with my dad before he died, and then my dad and my brother died 5 days apart. And
Oh my gosh. Was that unexpected that your brother had passed away?
I think I knew he was, I don't, how do I put this? I knew he was going to die. He had
Mhm.
told me. I won't get into the details of that, but I didn't expect it.
Mm,
When I didn't expect it.
sure.
It was one of those things, oh, don't worry, I'm fine.
Yes.
And
Wow.
I certainly didn't expect it 5 days before the death of my father. So yeah, it was, I don't know, a bit traumatic, I guess you could say. Um, yeah, so that, in retrospect, I look back on that now and I realize that was the beginning of my caregiving journey, because then there was no one for my mother.
Mhm.
And I started going across the state line once a month to spend 3 or 4 days with her to check on her, make sure she was okay. And she was in such a deep state of grief with, our eldest son, and losing her husband of 67 years in 1 week. It was pretty awful for her.
Yeah.
Um, and I kept that up for a year. And I have 2 younger brothers who live north of me, several states away, and they were not doing that. And I recognized it was time for her to be closer. In fact, I even had an appointment with her GP,
Mhm.
and he said to me, she's a lonely old woman and she needs her family with her. And
Wow.
that cinched it. I was like, okay.
Was she part of that conversation with the doctor?
No,
That was, yeah,
I invited her, but she wouldn't go.
sure.
So I went, and she respected him a great deal. He'd been their family physician for many years, and so that was good that I had that conversation with him. And of course my brothers were against it. She and my father had lived in the same area for all their married lives, and They were, thinking, well, her neighbors will look after her and this and that and the other. And I'm like, but her neighbors aren't. They're as old as she is.
Right, right. That's so fascinating that you were the one who once a month was traveling to see her for 3 to 4 days at a time. You were the one who had engaged with the doctor. The doctor made a recommendation, and then your brothers had pushback with it. Um, I'm interested in your take. I want to hear your full story, and then just what else you think was really holding them back from that.
Well, they weren't going to see her once a month. They had been to the memorial service, which was a combined service. Don't ever do that. We had done all that, and they went back to their lives, and they weren't going there once a month, and I was, and
Right.
I knew her friends. I had made um, a commitment to know her friends.
Hmm.
I thought that was important. That was an important piece for me to connect with her neighbors and her friends in their retirement community. And they were very helpful to me during that year I was traveling back and forth. And they were, an additional piece of information also. And there was one moment in time where she just was in terrible shape, and her friend called me up and said, can you come? Because your mother's really need you. And so that's something I recommend to caregivers now. If your parents live a distance away, and maybe wherever they live, get to know their neighbors, get to know their friends, connect with them, because that's important. Not only connections, but important information for you sometimes that your parents may not share with you.
Right.
So anyway, my brothers were not going down there, and their opinion was that, she lived in this area with her whole married life, 67 years with my father. All her friends were there. She had good neighbors. And my point was, she's not the responsibility of her neighbors. She's our responsibility. And they're as old as she is. She was 88 at the time, 89, Like, I've just pushed forward and found a beautiful, beautiful assisted living place here in Virginia where I live, and got her in and packed her up and moved her.
And how willing was she to make that move?
Well, that was an interesting little story that I share often with caregivers, because, having that conversation with your parents about when is it time to move to a retirement community or assisted living or one of those things, is a difficult conversation. And a lot of caregivers are like, I would never put my parents in one of those places. Well,
Oh my God. Yeah.
you know, um, at any rate, she had had a hospital stay, and I had been down to visit with her, and this may sound manipulative, and it probably was, but I hit her in a weakened state.
Mm. Well, and in a state of reality, like that's
Yeah.
where things were.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
She had to go into rehab after the hospital stay, and so that's where she was when I went to visit. And we were sitting out front, and one day, and she was sitting in this wheelchair, and she said, I didn't think I'd ever end up like this. And I looked at her and I said, Mom, have you thought about maybe coming to live near me? And she didn't say anything. And she loves where I live. I live out in the country in the mountains, and she loved it here. Oh my God, she loved it here. I said, I know a good place, and you'd be 30 minutes away, and you could come spend the weekends with me on the farm. And what do you think? And she sat, she still didn't say anything. It was like total silence. And I'm like, oh gosh. And then she turned and she looked at me and she said, I guess it's time. And that was that. About a month later, yeah, I guess, I packed her up and moved her up here to Virginia.
Wow.
She had a little apartment in assisted living, and yeah,
Mhm.
when she came
And
out
how
to
long did she live there?
well, she lived in it's what is considered independent living, because they have apartments, but they have a dining room and a nursing staff, and if you need help, it's there. That's why I called assisted. Um, she lived in that level of assisted for 3 years, or almost 4 years, and I would bring her out here to my farm every weekend for 3 or 4 days, and we had some great times.
Mhm.
It was really special. Sorry, it makes me emotional.
Yeah.
it was really special for the two of us. And then she had an illness, and there's always, criteria you have to pass to live at that level before you go to the next level. She couldn't pass criteria, so she moved into the second level of assisted living. And she was there for a little over 2 years. She had a hemorrhagic stroke and died 6 months later. Yeah, so.
So it sounds like you had done, I mean, first of all, just what a compassionate offer for her to invite her to come live by you instead of one, leaving her to try and figure it out on her own accord, because that is really, really hard for people. And then two, to be willing to just sit in that real discomfort of silence after making the offer. I
Well,
think
she
is
could have, she was in a continuing care retirement community. She could have done all this there,
right.
but I would have
Right.
still been going to visit her once a month or more. And it was just no longer feasible for me to continue that. And
Right.
I didn't want her to be alone.
Right.
She had her friends, but she had no family.
Right. There's a sustainability piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, Michelle, there was just something about looking at my mother at 89, having lost her husband and her firstborn son, and she was just so sad and lonely. I'm sorry. Oh,
Yeah.
it always gets to me. I just couldn't leave her. I couldn't have her live with me. Now that was not gonna happen. That was not gonna happen. But I could have her live 30 minutes away and spend weekends with me, and
Right.
take her out to lunch during the week and take her shopping and do things with her while she was able, and she was for a number of years. So
How did she do with that adjustment, moving into the new community where there's new friends? I mean, at 89 and you're starting to make new friends again. What was that like for her?
it was hard for her. It
Yeah.
was. She wanted me to do everything with her.
Hmm.
She had been very active in her community, and they had a community building where they had a swimming pool and all that sort of stuff, and she would go twice a week and do water aerobics and stuff. And this place had a beautiful facility for that, and I arranged for them to take her so she could continue that effort. And she looked at me, she said, I want you to come with me. And that was a moment in time, Michelle, where I realized that I really hate to say this, and I don't like for caregivers to say role reversal, but I did feel to some degree I was parenting. I said, you need to make your friends here. And I'm here whenever you want me, but I'm not here every day. You need to do
Right.
this. And she wouldn't do it. And she did make some friends, but I really believe all those years that she lived here, she's in what I've come to know since I've become certified as a grief facilitator, um, is called complicated grief. She would never talk about
Mhm.
it. She was of that generation. She would
Right.
sit here on my porch and look at the mountains and just say, I miss Bob. That's my dad. Or I miss Kevin. That's my brother. And that's all she would say.
Yeah.
She would never talk about it. And I think she was just never processed the grief that she was going through. And so she didn't fully engage. She would do activities and she would have lunch in the dining room with people. And she didn't give up, I would say, but she just wasn't interested in being engaged fully like she had been.
Right.
Yeah.
And it sounds like even had she stayed in the original community, just the weight of that grief was having an impact on her health and her mental health anyway, as it was. So the geography played much less of a role. It sort of didn't matter where she was.
That's a very good point. And really that was a lot of what was behind my wanting her to move here. I could see the signs even just in her apartment that
Mm-hmm.
she was not really engaged. I could see her around the people that she knew there, that she was just not really engaged. And
Right.
that's a really, really good point, Michelle, because she had so much grief that she just couldn't. And I don't get me wrong. I mean, this was a woman who was a feisty person, and everybody loved her. She was witty and smart and just extremely engaging with people. And she was at times. And then there were moments, a lot, most I would say, that there was just under the surface of her outward efforts that I could see that pain, just that pain of loss.
Yeah.
So, my almost 7 years of caring for her, I went through this continuum, this sort of bell curve of caring, from her being in really good shape physically. She was really in pretty good physical shape until the stroke. And but I went through so many things that caregivers go through. Multiple ER visits. I get the call, your mom, and you've got your phone with you 24/7, right?
Yeah. Yes. Always.
Always.
And
And
every time it rings, you
yeah,
jump.
you exactly.
Yeah.
Um, so all those ER visits and some hospital stays, and then I made the decision. I had to make the decision for her to move to the next level of care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was just, people think, if your parent is in assisted living, and my brothers even said this to me, oh, that must be easier on you. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, not really,
Right.
yeah, when you leave, there are other people there that can check on them. But those, even the good places, and this was a really good place, they have one certified nursing assistant that may be looking after 18 residents on a 10 or a 12-hour shift. They're not there to socialize.
Right. Well, and what I'm learning about is the difference between caregiver strain and caregiver burden. And as I am understanding it, like the caregiver burden is when you are physically providing the care and managing and doing and handling all the things, but there is always, always, always a caregiver strain, which is the worry and the fear and there's still so many logistics. And
Yeah.
I mean, my family members as well, at home for a period of time, and then in senior living communities, there with every solution comes some new concerns or problems in
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
It absolutely allowed me to breathe a little bit easier, but you really don't breathe deeper until someone passes away,
Yeah.
in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, when she died, which was at the end of January in 2018, so coming up on our anniversary this month, she was 94. And I sat with her during those 4 days that she was in that active dying phase.
Mhm.
And she was, when a body goes into that phase, they're pretty much they're not unconscious, but they're just not aware a lot of who's around them and what's going on
Mhm.
because the body's shutting down. Um, and that was, I'm glad I was there. I was actually not there the minute she died. Which I hear is frequent happening. But I was there with her, and she was more than ready to go. And that's another story I won't get into right now. But what hit me after that year that she died, that January, was I sat here in my house. I had realized, so I have a leadership training and coaching company that I've been running for many, many years.
Hmm.
And during the years that I was caring for her, particularly the last 3 of those years when she was in the second level of assisted living, and I really had to do more. I had to be there more frequently. I had to make sure she had the clothes she needed. I had to make sure she had her special chocolates, and because it really got to the point where getting her out of the building was just too unmanageable for me. She was in
Right.
a wheelchair, and while I could pick it up and put it in the trunk of the car, when someone is in a wheelchair, you have to think about everything before you go anywhere,
Right.
even where you're going. So I didn't get her out of the building as frequently, so I spent more time there with her. Um, and you're doing a lot of things for them because, well, yes, they get a lot of services in assisted living. They don't get a lot of extra things. And they, those places are great, but like her clothes would go missing, or her favorite throw blanket would go missing, or she would run out of underwear or bras or whatever, and you have to take care of all of these things because no one else will, you know? And so those last several years, well, the first half of her time here, we spent a lot of time out here on my farm and going out and doing things and, having a lot of fun experiences together. The last 2.5, 3 years were much more intense because she wasn't as physically able to do things with me. She couldn't come out here anymore. Um, in fact, the day she realized it, she was out here one weekend and she was using the rolling walker. This is before she decided to not really walk anymore. It was her decision. She just was going to use a wheelchair. But before that, she was walking back to the bedroom in the hallway. She turned around and she looked at me and she said, Robin, I think this is probably the last weekend I'll spend out here.
Mhm.
My heart just broke. But she knew, she knew. So the year that she died was just really, I devastating's not the word. Traumatic's not the word. I don't know what the word is for what it was like. It was just deep and dark. It was deep.
Yeah.
Um, I had been her caregiver for almost 7 years, and then she was gone.
The permanency of losing someone,
Yeah,
even if it's expected, you cannot prepare for that.
you cannot. Yeah, and there's this thing called anticipatory grief, and
Right.
I knew when she had a hemorrhagic stroke, I had to put her into hospice care. I knew she was going to die. I knew she was ready to die.
Right.
I mean, she'd been talking about it for years. She would sit out here and she'd say, I wonder how much longer I'm going to live. I'm really ready to go and move over and let someone have my space here, And it used to horrify me, but then I just got used to her. I mean, when you're that old, you know you're at the end of your life. So why not talk about it,
Right.
But I wasn't that, like you say, the permanency of here one day, gone the next, and all of my life that revolved around that. And I had cut back on my leadership work by about 30% because I just couldn't carry a client load like I had before.
Hmm.
I was just sitting here going, now what do I do? And the really ironic thing about that was my mother used to always say to me after she came up here, she said, what are you going to do with all your time when I'm gone? We just laugh. I'm like, are you kidding me? And then here it was, and I didn't know what to do.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like she was afraid of dying. She had more curiosity about it.
She was ready. Uh,
Hmm.
she was she was so ready. She would say, I'm ready to go see Bob and Kevin, my dad and my brother. And she was not a religious person, so I don't really know what she thought.
Hmm.
But she was ready. She was just ready to go. She said, I don't know why I'm still here.
Did you find it hard for you to accept her feelings about that? Because I feel like a lot of times family members, while their loved one is saying, their family member is saying, I'm ready, the child, the whoever is trying to convince them, no, 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 you have more life to live. Or how did you feel about it when she would say that?
Well, when she first started making those kinds of comments, I was kind of horrified.
Hmm.
And I would say, "Oh, mom, stop talking about that," or "Oh,
Hmm.
you're so healthy," because she was really in good health, and she was, mentally excellent. So I was like, "What's going to happen?" You know.
Yeah.
Um, but the more she would say it, the more I got comfortable with it. That
Mm.
here's this 90-year-old woman. She's lonely. She's sad. She's still grieving, and I just accepted. She was ready to go. And as much as I knew I would miss her, I couldn't change it.
And as much time as you were spending with her, she still felt lonely. And I think sometimes we can get caught up in this feeling of, well, I just need to be here as more and more and more to stave off someone's loneliness. But it is a human emotion.
Yeah, and Michelle, the thing about caregivers that I learned about myself and have learned since I've started working with caregivers is that, especially when we're new at it, we just feel like we have to be there all the time.
Hmm.
Like you said, we have to stave off the loneliness. We have to fight for their health. We have to make sure they're eating well. We have to be there all the time because we're their person. And especially if they've had a loss, like of a husband of 67 years and maybe a child or something, we have to be there. We have to fill in that void for them. And so we run ourselves ragged because we feel like that's what we have to do. And
Right.
that's the compassion and the nurturer in us. And then we run ourselves ragged. And then we burn out. I did at one point. I burned out.
Yeah.
So there's a balance in there. And I really, with what the work I do with caregivers now, it's all about helping them find that balance point in there. Sometimes it tips a little one direction or the other, but there is a balance you can achieve when
There's
you
a
become.
pivotal point.
There's a pivotal point. Exactly. Thank you. That's exactly what it
It's a
is.
pivotal point. So
Yeah.
do you find that what you are teaching people are some of the things that you did for yourself when you hit that burnout
Oh,
mark?
absolutely. Absolutely.
So let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about what your program is and how you can help people.
Yeah, so the year she died, like I said, it was a pretty deep, dark year for me. And one of the things that had been happening to me over those years I cared for her here was in my leadership training classes. I kept meeting these managers who were caregivers because I would share a little bit because I had to leave my phone on.
Hmm.
I like, you guys got to turn these off, but I got to leave mine on.
Right.
And then they started coming up to me like, wow, I just opened a door. And so I thought after that year, I needed to do something. Because I was so alone the whole time. I was so alone. And I couldn't find any kind of support groups that I felt valuable, that were helpful to me. And people didn't want to hear your stories. And
Mm.
so anyway, I became certified as a caregiver consultant at the end of 2019 and rolled my caregiving services into my leadership company so that I could help those managers.
Right.
And so what I've done, and the pandemic was what prompted this, is I have now turned it into an online membership business I call it the PATH program, Pivoting Around to Healthy Caregiving. And through my training as a caregiver consultant and through my personal experiences, I have created courses bite-sized, digestible courses that can carry you from, hey, I'm watching my parents in their 80s starting to need more help, to all the way to, hey, my parent just died and now I'm in that place that you were in. What do I do? And so I've written all these pieces of content, and I have other benefits like relaxation audios and guest expert speakers, all pre-recorded, 24/7 accessible. At the upper tier, you'll get live workshops that I do and one-on-one coaching with me. And then there's a group coaching benefit as well. So my intention there was originally was to do one-on-one, and then I went on Zoom doing it during the pandemic. And then that was just hard to sustain, really. Because we were all locked down. It wasn't like I could get out and meet people. So I decided to create this membership business and create a community, the community that I wish I had had, for caregivers, that you can jump in anywhere on my continuum of care courses and find something that works for you. You can be in the middle of it, at the end of it, at the beginning of it. There's something there for everybody. And what I realized, and what was really behind the sort of the impetus of creating it the way I did, was that I had told you I got burned out because I was doing everything. I was her every person,
Right.
I didn't really have to be that every person, but I didn't know that. And I had no support. So I was her every person. And one day I went to see her when she was in the next level of care. And I remember sitting in the car that day, and I just burst into tears and started crying and crying and crying. And I thought, I can't go in there.
Mm.
I can't go in there one more day. I can't do it. I just can't do it. And I pulled myself together, um, covered up my face, and I went in with a big smile on my face. I never wanted her to know that I was having a hard time with this. And she looked out. She was sitting in her chair reading a book. She loved to read. And she said, I'm so glad to see you. Give me a hug. And I knew I was doing what I did, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that was my turnaround point. That was like, okay, you got to change the way you're doing this, because you obviously can't keep doing it this way. And so I learned, I put boundaries in place for things. I learned how to create caregiving teams, some of whom were the staff at the assisted living building.
Mm-hmm.
I learned how to have conversations with doctors that had not been successful previously. And now I was like, okay, I'm going to get this part right, because there's enough doctor visits here.
Mm-hmm.
And there was so many things that I just flipped around. I did like a 360 on a lot of things that I was doing so that I could take care of myself. And not, I had lost myself, as happens. I see it happen all the time. I had given up a lot. And while I do believe sometimes you do have to give some things up, you don't have to give up everything. And so I've put all that into my program to support caregivers, to educate them, to give them resources, to provide a community of other caregivers that will listen to you and not turn their ear when you start talking about something unpleasant, as often caregiving can be.
Well, and there are certain sentiments and feelings and emotions and things that we've experienced that once you don't understand it unless you're in that space. So I think that's why it's so valuable to have a community and a space like you've created, because when people are just talking to their friends just don't quite get it.
No. And you know what people say? People say things that they don't know any better. They'll go, well, aren't you lucky that you still have her here with you? She's so lucky to have you. Well, that doesn't really help you when you're feeling really beaten up. Or at least this, da 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 da. And
You're like, I'm not looking for a moment of gratitude here, okay?
right, yeah. I'm not looking for the silver lining. I really just want you to hear me out. And
yes.
People
Yes.
that don't do it don't get it.
Yeah.
I went to a therapist at one point during that sort of burnout phase because I didn't know what else to do. And she sat there and said, well, why don't you call your brothers and ask them to come down? Yeah, I said, yeah, okay. Yeah, they're one weekend a year. Sure, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Here's your
Yeah.
150 bucks. I'll see you later.
Right. I love that you recognized in the car in that moment that something had to change. And I think oftentimes we'll have those spaces, times, moments in our lives, those pivotal moments, really. And not everybody acts on it. Not everybody has the courage or the motivation to just take one little actionable step. But the difference it can make on the other side, once you have taken that step, is so powerful and impactful in your life. You mentioned, you do have to sacrifice, you do have to give up a lot of things, but the number one thing people cannot continue to sacrifice is themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, if they go down, the whole thing falls apart.
Oh, exactly. And unfortunately, we don't realize I see it all the time now with caregivers. They don't realize it until they're in that place.
Right.
And they are so close to the edge of falling off. And then they can't help that person they're caring for because they're so close to falling over that cliff. And when you're at that place, it's so hard to pull somebody back from the edge because you're not rationally thinking. You're just beyond exhausted. Your brain is not functioning in a normal way. And I think the fact that I just started sobbing really in my car that day, I was like, what in the world is going on? Um, and I was just leaned over the steering wheel, just sobbing, thinking I can't go in there one more day. And when I stopped crying, I have to keep going in here. She doesn't have anybody else. I have to keep doing this. And I think that thought is what made me go, okay, you're going to figure some stuff out right now, girl, because that smile you got when you went in there and that hug, that's why you go in there,
Mm-hmm.
because she's so happy to see you. And you don't ever
Yeah.
want to know how much it hurts you. So, yeah,
Yeah.
so I figured a lot of stuff out.
Yeah. I think there's this threshold of acceptance. Um, and I'm thinking what's coming up for me is like this release that occurs of the reality. And there's like, you're struggling against the reality. And once you can step into, okay, this is going to continue, this is ongoing. And so what do I need to implement now to maintain myself, my energy, my stamina?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I actually did it before this happened. It was when she was still coming out to my farm on the weekends. And I was just, we didn't always get along, my mother and I, as often daughters and mothers don't. And it was hard. It was stressful out here, as much as I loved having her here, because I had to cook meals for her. I did her laundry for her. I had to keep an eye on her because she was she was frail, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah. Uneven surfaces and
uneven surfaces. I had a big dog. I mean, lots of things.
yes.
And uh, so when I started putting boundaries in place at that point in time, one of the things I did was I decided I would have one weekend to myself. One weekend I wasn't bringing her out here. And the first weekend I did that, I felt so guilty. That's our greatest companion is guilt.
Right. Oh, you're gonna do something for yourself? Let me just slather some frost that with guilt.
Yeah, let's just cover it up with guilt so you don't feel so good. But I did it and I got through the weekend. I thought, okay, I can do this. I need one weekend for me. And that worked. Of course, I tried to make it up during the week, but you can try little things out, But when I hit that burnout wall and sat in my car crying that day, I was like, I had to do bigger things than just trying stuff out. I had to really change my whole approach, which I did, and it worked. It worked. And I saved my sanity,
Yeah.
and my health.
So, how would people get a hold of you or find out more about your programs and what you offer that can support them?
My website, of course, is mypivotalpoint.com, and that's pivotalpoint.com. And what you'll find when you go to my website is my leadership company,
Mm-hmm.
but you'll find a page, a button or whatever you call it at the top that says Caregiving Consulting. And if you click on there, you'll go to my website for caregivers. And you'll be able to see the services that I have available through my membership on there. Now, you can't get into the membership because it's behind a paywall. And as I said, there are 3 levels that you can join at. And I've made them very affordable, as well as you can pay monthly or you can pay for a 6-month membership. So, you sign up for memberships, a lot of times you either pay monthly or by a year. And I felt like with caregivers, a year is too much. So 6 months, and if you can rejoin or whatever you want to do at the end of that 6-month period. I so there I'm on LinkedIn, Robin Weeks, and you can look me up on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. You can look up my Pivotal Point on Facebook, and I do have a private Facebook group, my Pivotal Point Caring for Caregivers, that anyone can join. And so, yeah, that's how you can reach me. Now, every month I do a conversation called the Caregiver Connection. I promote it on LinkedIn and Facebook and Eventbrite, and it's free. You can sign up. It's once a month, just a place to come and just talk.
That's so great.
And I'm doing workshops about every month or every other month. I'll be doing one at the end of February. And I'm doing this one because recently I've been having a lot of conversations with those that see caregiving in their future.
Mm.
And
They're like in that first phase, that beginning.
what I call early signs. And I've been doing a lot of consulting with those individuals on how to get started, how to get ready. I'd say don't be scared, be prepared.
Oh, that's good.
And so I'm going to do a workshop. It'll be a paid workshop at the end of February. You can look for that on social media, and Eventbrite will post it, and they're wherever they post things pretty broadly, I think. And it'll be a 2-day workshop with I'm going to offer a discount if you join the membership at the end of the workshop. So
Super.
yeah. So I try to get out there as much as I can on social media these days, and I'm always on Zoom if you want to meet with me one-on-one. So.
You can help anybody really anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I think, to me, a lot of people say the pandemic was awful. I found a lot of gifts, and
Mhm.
this way of communicating and meeting people was one of them. And I've met you this way. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story and some of those special moments with your mama with us.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't regret any of that time. I wouldn't have traded it for anything. Yeah, I told someone one time, I was one of these early caregivers I've been working with. I said, you're getting ready to have an amazing journey. And she said, why do you call it amazing? And I said, because nobody else gets to go on it but you. And just think of all the amazing memories you'll have. And that's amazing. You get to do amazing things, and it won't always be easy. It'll be hard, and there'll be heartbreaks, and some days you'll hate it. But it's an amazing journey, and it's only yours. It's nobody else's amazing journey. So it is.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being here today.
Welcome. Thanks for having me, Michelle. I love talking with you.
What I know for sure is that things are going fine until they're not. Everyone wants to stay in their home for as long as possible. And then there's a fall or a hospital stay or clear signs of dementia or a diagnosis, and remaining at home becomes questionable or potentially impossible. It is super important that you are informed about what assisted living and nursing home care can offer and understand how to choose the one that will best fit the needs of your family. I know from personal and professional experience what objections are going to come up and how to navigate those conversations. You love your family member and you are doing a great job. It just feels like the situation is fragile. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop and you don't know what you don't know. Illuminating Senior Living answers all of your questions and walks you through step by step each common objection and frequently asked question. This course will save you so much time and heartache. Imagine knowing exactly when it's time to move and ensuring the care and safety of your family member. Imagine knowing what specifically to be looking for in a care community and how to have the conversations about moving. Illuminating Senior Living gives you the roadmap so you're prepared. Click the link in the show notes, Illuminating Senior Living, to secure your video course today.